Whoa. So we could like click it off right there. And I think all of us would just leave like gasping. Like, here is the miracle that is possible.
So many people, if you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, there are skill sets and there are graces in your life and talents and passions that we take for granted so often. Like I never really thought any of that was, super special because it's all I'd done for so long. For so many of us, there are things that we've done for so long, we've normalized them, that we've normalized the magic. And the problem with that is when you do that, like you miss the miraculous in your life because you write it off as mundane.
Welcome to Unreasonable Autonomy. My name is Sarah Grace. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs and innovators who refuse to settle. Here we dive deep into raw, real conversations with boundary pushers who have pursued seemingly impossible ideas and yet have achieved unreasonable results, whether that's in their faith, relationships, health, politics, yes, even business. All of those conversations are happening right here, right now. So let's buckle up because this isn't about playing it safe. Unreasonable ideas, unstoppable results. Let's go. You guys, welcome back to the podcast. It is Sarah. Really excited to be sitting across from someone who I would say is mysterious and I would say is unafraid of talking about the things that can often feel divisive or controversial. But one of the reasons I knew that I had to have the Cody Jefferson on here, by the way, spoiler, that's who it is I think that you have built such a beautiful life. Oh. When I come to your feed and I see your family and I see your marriage and I see the men that you are helping, it is just beautiful and it takes my breath away and inspires me. So that's why I asked you to be here.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So for those of you who are new to the world of Cody Jefferson, let me tell you a little bit about him. He's gone from a former pastor who once led congregations. He's now a powerhouse entrepreneur, coaching high-level leaders across the country. One of the things we'll dive into is Cody has taken every curveball life could possibly have thrown his way, and you have turned it into fuel, my dear friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about some of that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the principles behind that too. You're the founder of Embrace the Lion, and you're not just helping CEOs and entrepreneurs scale their business. You're really starting to shift into how can we reclaim your life, your purpose, your energy, you're a speaker, you're all the good things. I think people just want to hear from you. Are you ready to go?
I'm born ready. Let's go. Let's do it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, let's just start with the elephant in the room. So it is Wednesday, November 6th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. It is literally the day after the election. How did you vote?
So I'm from Oklahoma. So if there was there's no question how I vote. I vote straight Republican, but always have. So I'm more party voting and I'm more policy voting than I am personality. And that's just how I was raised. And so we have fundamentals that we adhere to. We have value propositions that we adhere to. And so I'm a red through and through.
I love it. I love it. And I think we're in many ways on the same page that way. And one of the things I think is scary in the world of entrepreneurship or fatherhood, or for me, motherhood, is your kids are watching you.
Yeah.
Your kids are watching who you are becoming, the challenges that you've had. You've been through a super public divorce, some huge challenges that have happened, and they are watching you. What is something that you're like, this is something I've done really well in their eyes?
I think it's an ongoing process. So I would say that one of the things that I'm proud of and I'm proud to extend to my kids is the idea of transforming trauma. And so transforming pain into power, because if we can transform the trauma, then we don't transmit it to kids. And I can't say that was always the case. And so it has been a real learning experience for me. And so I would say that would be being a dad that I'm proud to be. And being a husband that I'm proud to be, being a co-parent that I'm proud to be. Those things that I'm happy to pass on to my kids.
That's super inspiring. I want to like create a woman program so I can come to that one. That would be so great.
I learned a long time ago. A man doesn't tell a woman how to be a woman. I'm not gonna mansplain that to anybody.
We'll determine that by the end of the podcast. How about that? We'll see what comes out. Well, so following up in combining this idea of like turning trauma into something that can be beautiful for you. And also that we just finished an election, like literally 12 hours ago, I think he was declared the winner. What is the conversation like with you and your kids when your kids are saying, yeah, I get that we vote on policy, but dad, like his history with women and like he's going to maybe go to prison or he's been convicted or Can we just talk about that? What does that discussion look like in a powerful way with kids when you have a candidate like that?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you that we don't, just us personally, we don't really have those conversations. Our kids aren't asking those
Mm.
questions. I would say probably because we're not super political.
Mhm.
So, we've got enough going on. I'm more interested in the larger conversation of Congress and the House and how we push policy and how we represent that well as a country and how we protect freedoms and protect constitutional rights. I'm big on, small government. I'm obviously a capitalist. And so we talk more on those things. If the question ever came up on the topic of someone's character, for us, we believe that obviously a man of faith, that God is a God of grace. That doesn't mean that there aren't repercussions or for things that we experience and things that we have to walk through in ways in which we live and move and have our being that certainly have repercussions tied to them. But if I'm going to be the one to cast the first stone at somebody who's made some mistakes in their life, then I better be casting a stone at myself first. So,
Wow. So his grace is sufficient.
yeah, I mean,
Or
there is no perfect candidate. There never has been. I think that anyone can romanticize someone, anyone can overlook certain things that a candidate has been, or just a human being in general. Anyone in leadership has been through or has experienced. What I tend to look at is the fruit. So, what is the fruit of their life? What is the fruit of what they've produced? Have they had some indiscretions? There's nobody that hasn't. In the book I read, there's been one guy. So nobody else, if anybody else had been raised from the dead, you can let me know. But outside of that, we got one guy. So everybody has their issues. Everybody has their traumas. Everybody has their propensities. Everybody has their past and their history. I'm one to say, yeah, we can look at history, but we can also look to the hope of a future. So
I love it. Looking forward, looking forward. And for those who are or are not familiar with you, you do have a huge past in being a pastor and a preacher and all the things. Give
yeah.
us a little bit of a backstory on how you got from there to entrepreneurship.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I got into occupational ministry at 19. I was there through my early 30s. So in 2015, I had been in ministry for a number of years. And I can tell you that over those years, it was a beautiful season. I loved it. I loved every part of being in ministry. I would say that the problem for me, which is the problem for a lot of people in leadership, is that there's unresolved trauma. And if you don't deal with that trauma, then it just manifests in your leadership. And so as somebody who was pretty insecure growing up and didn't quite fit in all the ways that I think I wished I would have or had kind of dreamed of fitting in. I was just wired a little bit differently, did well in school, but I was into different things and kind of a square peg in a round hole. I started recognizing that I had a skill set for mitigating emotional experience and helping people walk through things. I had a pretty volatile childhood with some things that my parents experienced. And so navigating adult emotions as a kid, you start to recognize or form an idea that if I'm not solving trauma, if I'm not putting out fires, if I'm not doing these things, then I'm not worth loving, I'm not worth celebrating. And so you push that into ministry or some sort of leadership position over 13 years where you're walking with people through trauma. The problem with that is my entire identity got wrapped around the idea of solving problems and cultivating peace and chaos to the point where there wasn't chaos, you tend to create. We do that in business because I have to have a fire to put out. Because if there isn't grit or friction, then I don't know who I am. And so, that capsized in 2015 when my son's mother, you'll never hear me call her my ex. She's just my son's mom. We just didn't work married. Let me know that she wanted a divorce. There was a lot of things going on. I was working too much. I was coping in unhealthy ways with the stress and pressure that I placed on myself to be perfect and to be all things to all people. So our marriage capsized as a result of that. And a couple other things. But so that was the main crux. But in the midst of that, still, there's no moral failing on my part or anything. So stayed in ministry. But in the midst of that season, so in the midst of that year, because a divorce takes a while if you got kids, I went through a tremendous season of loss. So lost 8 family members and friends, led their funerals. Most were murders, suicides, overdoses. So it was just a lot of almost monthly trauma. And again, all things to all people. I can do this. God's got a plan. And so it's kind of like when you've gone through so much, and I'm sure some will resonate with this, you just kind of have that shell shock ringing in your ears and you just kind of keep moving forward because you don't really know what makes sense anymore, but you just know what, put one foot in front of the other, keep going. I had a few pastor friends during that year take their own lives as a result of the overwhelming pressure that they had to grow communities and this really suffering from the same frustrations I was of really just not feeling like they were enough and that self-imposed pressure to perform. It all kind of reached ahead in late 16, early 17. The thing about people like us is we can really normalize stress. And so you just keep stacking it on and you keep pushing to the side like this. I was built for this. I was built for this. I was built for this. But your body isn't any different than anyone else's. And so I ended up going septic And which means that my internals just created infection, started fighting against themselves. And it was a rough time. I was unconscious for a few days and lost about 25 pounds in the hospital. And as a result, I mean, I'm on a testosterone now, thyroid medication, have to get blood work all the time. Like there's a real checks and balances to my physical health, and on the backside of that's going to be the rest of my life. And it's just a reminder of what stress, distress especially, that goes unchecked can do to the body. And so I was in that hospital that I recognized, man, I'm going to be trying to be all things to all people, and I can't even be there for my own son. And is this the legacy that I'm going to leave? A legacy where he doesn't even know me. It's just, oh well, I guess my dad showed up for people till it killed him. And it was just a couple months earlier that I had buried my best friend of 18 years on my birthday. And his 5-year-old son was sitting in the front row. And I kept having a vision of like, well, who's going to sit with my kid? And I didn't want that to be a reality. So no great story or anything. I just recognized that I needed to take a step back. And so I stepped out of occupational ministry and really just started trying to figure out a way to create some sort of identity for myself that wasn't wrapped up in performance and wasn't wrapped up in some sort of vanity metric or how I looked or how I performed or how I spoke or how I sat with people or praying the perfect prayers. I learned through that year that there is no perfect prayer. Like sometimes the only prayer you have is silence, and sometimes the greatest gift you can give people is just to sit with them in their pain without an answer. And in the midst of that, started putting some frameworks and some habits together that were useful to me, and started sharing my story online. And back in those days, it was really easy to go viral. So I did pretty quick.
Yeah.
And went to a conference 2 months after I stepped out of ministry for entrepreneurs. Never been to one before. I had no idea who anyone was, but a guy on Facebook was seeing my momentum, the founder of the conference. His name's Colby, and invited me out. Said, you got to come out. It's in Phoenix. Like, it's going to be a great time. And sure. Yeah, I got, I don't know. Let's do it. Because I think I want to walk with people. So I think that's a good play. So went out, and mind you, for everybody wondering, like, what'd you do in the meantime? I don't have the 6 figures in 6 days story. I don't have the 7 figures in 7 weeks story. Those are real cute and pretty on paper. But I've been a licensed mechanic for 22 years. I've been a licensed barber for 22 years, certified personal trainer. So I was flipping Harleys out of my garage, just rebuilding bikes and selling them. I was giving guitar lessons, piano lessons, vocal lessons. I'm a classically trained musician. I toured for about a decade. I was building websites. I was doing graphic design. I was creating meal plans and fitness plans for people. I was just doing anything I could to make my monthly burn, and it worked. And making myself healthy in the process, and just trying to be the best dad I could be in the midst of just a really uncertain season for myself. Because I'd really lost every sense of my identity. I wasn't a dad full time. I wasn't a pastor, which was the only thing I'd known my entire adult life. So just a real open book. But I went to this conference, and it was 120 degrees in the shade in Phoenix. I'd never felt a heat like that before. And again, 2 months out of ministry, the power goes out at this place. And when I first got there, I was like, well, I'm just going to play the pastor playbook. I'm just going to get to know everybody. I'm going to pretend like this is a church conference, and they don't even need to know me necessarily. But if I can know them, because we're a culture that's desperate to be known, but we settle for being seen. Everybody's here for a purpose. If I can understand what that is, and if I can connect people, because that's all I've done for 15 years, then I think I'll be all right. And I'll learn some things in the process. And so that was kind of my play. And then the power went out at lunch because it was so hot. Like it just fried.
Word.
And we're in a place called Galvanized. It's just a steel frame building. And so it's getting hot quick. And we're all staying at a hotel that's, I don't know, maybe half a mile down the road, because we had a big block of rooms. And I was like 300 people at this conference, which I'm used to much larger church conferences, but in the entrepreneurial world, that's pretty good. And so just all culture differences to me. Power goes out, and we got food trucks lined up. And I just called the hotel, and I said, hey, power's out. We need shuttles coming, and we need to pick these people up, and we need to bus them back to the hotel. Can you have fresh water down below? We also need a conference room that'll seat 300 people. We need 2 projectors running AV to the back, and we're just going to pipe that through a laptop. I go out to the food trucks. I said, hey guys, we're relocating over to the hotel. We have no power here. I go to AV, and I say, hey, we need everything backed up on your laptop. Let's just take it over, and we're just going to plug in. And so we have a 60-minute ETA. And so then I go to the founder, and I let him know what's going on. And he just looks at me and goes, who the hell are you?
No kidding. So I was thinking, what did Colby say?
In that moment, I was like, because I hadn't been out long enough to recognize, like, I'm not at a church conference, like where I'm always a part of leadership. So I just solved the problem. And I was like, I just ruined my chance. I just ruined everything. I just overstepped. And like, so then I was just like feeling a bunch of shame. And but he was like, thank you. That's awesome. So we go, everything's
Wow.
copacetic. I get lunch and I see an older gentleman sitting by himself. And obviously, like my mentality, I got to go sit with him. He's not going to sit by himself. And so he says, I said, you're the pastor. I'm like, word travels fast. He's like, I knew it in the way that you
Wow.
organized all that. He said, I'm a pastor too. I'm like, well, that's amazing. And so he's like, yeah, would you like to be on my podcast? I'm like, what's a podcast? I'm not in that world. I don't know. And he's like,
Yeah.
it's like a radio show. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. What do you want to talk about? He's like, let's just talk about your story. I'm like, and why you're here. I'm like, cool. And so I was like, when do you want to do that? He's like, right now. I'm like, okay. So we go up to like a room he had secured. In hindsight, probably just wouldn't go up with Strange Man anymore to like rooms, but it seemed legit at the time. You know, I'm about as green as they come. And I'm just the super trusting guy from Oklahoma. Like certainly nothing weird's going to happen. So we go up there and Tom Bilyeu's up there, who I didn't know at the time, but I met him. And he's like, so what do you do? And I'm like, oh man, I help pastors take guns out of their mouths. Cause that was like the tagline. And he looks at me and he goes,
What a hook. Nice.
he goes, that's pretty heavy. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, you might lead with something different. Cause he's like, I don't know that that's going to really land with the masses. I'm like, what about helping good men become great? He's like, that's it. It's like, okay, cool. So I sit down and I put the headphones on. And he's got an SM7B. And so I'm like, oh, you got the 7B. And he's like, you're a musician. I'm like, yeah. And so
Yeah.
he's like, let's get started. You ready? He's like, do you have a bio? I'm like, bro, I don't even have an LLC. I don't have anything. And he's like, it's fine. I've done this before. And it's like, okay. And so we sit down and he goes, you ready? I'm like, ready. He goes, all right, friends, welcome back. This is Alan Taylor with Entrepreneur Magazine, entrepreneur.com, and Entrepreneur Radio. And I'm like,
No,
oh, crap.
no, I'm dying.
I was
How
like,
have I not heard this story?
I'm not ready. I was like, I'm not ready. So, and you can still find it online. And so we talked through it. That ended up getting picked up by USA Today, Today Show, a whole lot of things, a lot of syndications. And that led me on a path of being on probably close to 150, 200 podcasts in a year. And so my trajectory just went real fast.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And it took some time for me to find my footing in where I really found like where I belonged in the space. I started out in the fitness space because I was a single dad who was in shape and charismatic, and that kind of worked. But then recognized there were skill sets that I had that just didn't require me to have my shirt off all the time. So
Sure.
decided to go that route. And now here we are.
Wow. Whoa. So we could like click it off right there. And I think all of us would just leave like gasping. Like, here is the miracle that is possible. It's absolutely
you know what?
possible.
It's, so many people, if you just put yourself, if you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, there are skill sets and there are graces in your life and talents and passions that we take for granted so often. Like I never really thought any of that was, super special because it's all I'd done for so long. For so many of us, there are things that we've done for so long,
Right.
we've normalized them, that we've normalized the magic. And the problem with that is when you do that, like you miss the miraculous in your life because you write it off as mundane. And so in that moment, I recognized that there was a skill set that I'd created and cultivated over those 13 years in organizational leadership and speaking, in organizing events, in walking with people through seemingly every season of life that was a real gift that others hadn't. And, being through my own personal hell and being through so much trauma, there was an empathy of being able to sit with people that I pray most never have to experience, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to experience the loss because it allows me to withhold judgment and to be able to sit with people regardless of where they are and hold that space and help them navigate through it. So
I want to ask a million questions all at the same
Yeah.
time. I want to start with one of the first ones that really intrigues me about your journey. And that is the idea that you and I both have this really solid foundation of faith and a savior and of grace, and how that was either brought up through childhood or being a pastor or doing all those things. And then I hear these sides of you where it's like, public divorce and going septic and not handling things in the proper way, and trauma in childhood and having to be the golden handcuffs kid. That's what we call it in our family, the kid that has the golden handcuffs that just feels like I have to manage everyone's feelings and I'm the favorite child or whatever it may be. But how did you hang on to God through those experiences? Like, how did you not see it as I'm being punished or, this is the fruits of my labors. I've screwed up. He's abandoned me. Like, forget it. I'm out of here. Like, being a pastor has brought me nothing but pain and death and suicide of my friends. And what was that like, your wrestle with God through that season of your life?
it was messy. And there was a season in that where I actually stepped away from all of it. And I think because for me, I couldn't because everything was spiraling. I couldn't reconcile, like, okay, do I believe this because my grandparents raised me to believe it? Do I believe this because I went to school for it? Do I believe it because I taught it? Do I believe it because I was paid to believe it? Like, what do I actually believe? And
Yes.
do
Yes.
I believe God is still good and righteous in the midst of all of this? I didn't, Bonhoeffer in The Cost of Discipleship talks about this cheap grace. And it's like, my whole life has it just been cheap grace. Like there was a propensity of pain that I had never experienced before and had never walked through, and I wasn't seasoned for it. And again, I could pray cute prayers and I could lead Bible studies, but nothing equipped me for that kind of storm. And so it was really, really, I mean, it was, when I say it was messy, say it was messy. I went like as far as being like talking super universal and that God's not the way, he's a way, and all roads point back to something. I confused and hurt so many people that I led for 13 years. I confused parents. I was a youth pastor for a decade. I confused students. I hurt people because I was hurting. And I was doing my best to navigate it, but also navigating with this really bravado sense of like, just push through it and be masculine. And because when I got in the space, respectfully, those were the only male coaches I saw. Those were the first experiences I had in coaching, was
Sure.
super hyper masculine like guys. And so I thought, well, that's what I got to do. I got to be that. And I will tell you, it lasted about a week. And a dear friend of mine called me and said, what are you doing? What, that's not you. Who are you? Who have you
What a
been?
good friend. What a good friend.
Who have you been listening to? And why are you talking like that? Why is every other word the F word? Why are you using so much bravado? Like, what are you trying to, like, you need to step back. And we're close enough that I was able to receive it. Accountability that isn't asked for is often perceived as a threat, which is why we will most of the time kind of push back from it, and we'll create a real defensive posture. But I was open. And that actually has taught me to be really open to qualified criticism, qualified accountability in my life. So I have people in my life every day who hold me to a standard that I expect them to hold me to. And so I will say this, it wasn't perfect. It was really messy. And, but in the midst of all of that, I take the story of David as a really beautiful kind of illustration of someone who just really fought themselves, and I really fought myself, and I really fought my pain and trauma without processing it. I just tried to fight through it, and there's tried to go around it. And there's a book that I would read my son when he was little called Going on a Bear Hunt. And you can't go around it. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You got to go through it. But I'll be damned if I didn't try to do all those other things first.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got into therapy, and I'd done therapy for a number of years. I was just really good at it. So I could end up pastoring the therapist by the end of the session. Like, I would go as kind of like a lip service to the church, but I could end up just coaching you by the end of it. I was really good at that. But I ended up going to this little 5'2" Romanian woman who's got more degrees than I had excuses. And I sat down and I do my thing, do my thing for the first few minutes. And she looks at me, she goes, "Is this what you do?" And I was like, oh, crap.
Wow.
And for years, I've been seeing her, and she took an approach that nobody had before, which is highly academic, which is how I needed it to be. Help me understand why I was experiencing and the impact of stories and the impact of why I was doing what I was doing to confirm stories to be true in my life and based on what I felt that I deserved. And it was through that found some healing and some restoration in there. But no, that journey was messy. But in the midst of David's journey, in the midst of murder and infidelity and all the things that we sometimes leave out of the story, God always said, "There's a man after my own heart." And I think that in the midst of everything, to the best of my ability and my awareness and my mental health at the time, I have tried to seek God, even when it was fists clenched and teeth gritting. Even in my wandering, even in going prodigal, recognizing that even in that, God's grace was bigger than my desire and need to wander for a season. So
wow. And I am so grateful and moved. I think in religion there can be a real need to posture. Right? That a church is for the healthy.
Yes, everywhere. Yeah.
Yes. That's actually the question that I'm so intrigued by, because it's almost like the church is for the healthy instead of it being a hospital for the sick,
Sure.
and that we just don't get a lot out of it because there is not safety. in that setting, or not an ability to be open except for
Yeah.
in very private settings. So as you were going through this messiness, and I love how you pointed to what it looks like through language and behavior and,
Yeah.
willingness to listen to people or not, what did you learn about who God is that you didn't know before as you look back?
It's a great question. I learned that God was kind.
Oh, I
I
love
grew
that.
I grew up, and I'm so grateful for my upbringing. So many disciplines and modalities and virtues that my grandparents instilled into me, that I will forever be grateful for. I grew up pretty fundamental Baptist, and the view of God was just a little bit different. And so I knew God had a plan for me. That was real big when I was growing up. Like the purpose-driven life and all that. Like that was like we had made a commodity out of purpose in the church. The same way
Sure.
we do in entrepreneurship and in coaching.
Yep.
Only to find out that like there's more to buy. You're just one step away from your purpose. It's always
Cody, you said it. You said it out loud.
you're just one step away. But rather than just recognizing that your purpose isn't everything that you do, and it's just in how you live and move and have your being. You just get to do stuff. I'm not sure that God's so concerned with what you do with your time, so long as you're glorifying Him. But all that to say, I learned that God was kind and that God was gracious, and that if God was extending that grace to me in the midst of my own humanity and the hell that I'd created for myself and others, because I did. I created hell for my co-parent. I created hell for everybody. I just did my wandering, because everybody gets brought into that conversation. Yeah, there was a season where I didn't know how to cope. So like at night, I would drink too much. So I don't drink anymore, or very lightly socially. Yeah, but just wasn't useful. But in the moment, it was useful to confirm a story.
Right.
And so I've also learned that in the midst of there being repercussions and there being consequence and there being all of those things of natural order, that I don't have to hold myself hostage emotionally for decisions that I've made while in the midst of unhealthy seasons. That God's grace is bigger than those, and that I can learn from them. Again, certainly recognizing that there are consequences to those, and there are things that we do atone for. But in the midst of that, that God's grace never leaves us, and that He's kind, and that helps me to be kind to others and to be able to walk, free of judgment. I had just a case in point. I had somebody that I've known for 20 years that I haven't talked to. I haven't talked to in 5 years. Texted me last night while I'm at wrestling practice with my son, and I've made the biggest mistake. I need to talk to you. And so recognizing how serious the moment is, like I try to put a little levity into it so that we can breathe, right? Because when you're in that limbic system, you're not breathing well. And so I could feel the tension on the line. So I said, okay, well, buddy, I got a truck. Where we hiding this body? And he said, LOL, second worst thing. And I said, what did you do? What happened? He let me know that he had been unfaithful to his wife. And he said, can I call you? I said, well, my son's warming up. Sure, let's. Then he said, of everybody, I called you because I knew you wouldn't judge me. I said, yeah, I don't have any judgment for you. I do have an accountability for you. And I do have some words for you. And we need to navigate how we got here and why you're here. But judgment, no, I don't have any judgment for you. I have disappointment in your actions, but I know who you are. And I know in your heart, you're a good man. We need to figure out how we got here. So
It's just last night.
it was last night. Yeah. That's not, it's not those kinds of conversations. Thankfully, dudes just aren't out there cheating on their wives all the time. But no, I'm daily in those kinds of conversations. I think that's the modality of just the nature of the work that I do. So
100%, as you've built this, embrace the lion as you work with these men to just become great at what they do
and who they are. Yeah.
And who they are.
Yeah.
Perfect adjustment there, correction there. I think that matters a lot. So one of the things that is unique about you is you're very, honest about mistakes that have been in your past. And it's so refreshing for me personally as an entrepreneur to witness that and the honesty about the mistakes. I know that a lot of parents fear that I don't want to tell my children about my mistakes because they are just bound to repeat them, whether it's cheating or drinking or, all these, whatever things that, a couple of the things that you've brought up from friends or your own life. What is your stance on letting kids in onto the mistakes that we have made as parents?
Yeah. My son and I have a very, very special and very strong bond. There was a season, and there was a season where, especially when he was very, very young, when I was pastoring, that I missed a lot of things. And even when I was present, I wasn't present. And there have been other seasons younger in his life where I had made decisions that were just completely contrast to the man that I would want him to be. And I'm open with those. Now, as much as he'll be 10 on Sunday. So as much as you can be with Samuel, he's very intelligent, but there's also things that he would have a hard time navigating right now. But when the season comes and he is old enough, there will be nothing that I will not share with him if he asks. I find that if we don't illuminate the way that we've transformed things, then what that communicates subconsciously is a need to hide. And so then
Yes.
inherently
Yes.
they pick up that they need to hide certain things that they're ashamed of. Now, while there are seasons in my life that I'm not proud of and that I wish I could have done over, I wouldn't be who I am without them. And so what they serve as is a lesson. There were things about my grandfather was like my superhero, like the greatest man in my life. I learned last year, he passed away in 2013. I learned last year not to taint the greatness of who that man was, but I learned that he was a closet alcoholic. And as I couldn't believe it, but then I started remembering like, oh yeah, there was always whiskey in his wood shop and in his truck, and smelling it reminds me of him. But I never put those things together because in my head he was a superhero. But then it's like, man, if I'd have known that, maybe I wouldn't have gone that direction. And so I want to be honest with my son because I don't want to hide anything from him, because I want him to learn from my mistakes and not repeat them. Because if we don't transform the trauma, we transmit it. So.
Oh, it's so bold. And it immediately brings me into trying to envision you working with these men in your program in Embrace the Lion. Like, I want to be a fly on the wall so badly. And my question is as you work with these men, how do you, in your process, framework, whatever you want to call it, how do you help them catch that first vision on who they really are? Because we resist and we hide. How do you help them?
Well, I mean, we can't, you can't minister to a mask, and you can't help what people are committed to hiding. So, coming into our opportunity, I mean, there's a radical need for openness and honesty. And when people are honest, we create a safe, and the guys come to us and make no mistake, like nobody, I don't attract guys who are like, at their wits end, courting hookers in Vegas, doing 3 days of blow on the weekend. Like that's not my audience. So the coaches that are for those guys that, like the businessman who has it all, but he's doing all these crazy things. Most of my guys are real good men of faith who are just in a little bit over their skis in trying to figure out where the business goes from here, overworked, overtaxed, maybe lost their vision and purpose in the midst of building because it doesn't feel like the way they thought it would, lacks of structure and organization in the operating systems of their business. So they're kind of white knuckling and taking too much time away from their family, losing some intimacy with their wife, and don't really know who God is because singing songs on Sunday morning don't feel the same as it used to.
Yeah.
And so when we can get honest about, not necessarily, yes, let's get honest about where you are, but then let's also speak into the truth of where you are. And so, because you can be honest with yourself and still not be telling the truth, because they're subjective and objective. And so when we can come in objectively and say, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but if we look at your calendar, we look at the fruit of where you are right now, this is actually what's true. So once we can establish what's true, well, then it's, okay, well, where do you want to go from here? Who do you want to become? It's less about like, what do you want to scale your company to? Because that's just a byproduct of leadership and
Sure.
A healthy navigation of business practice. So that's pretty simple. That's an engine, and I can work on engines all day long. The real question is, who do you want to become? And then what does that even look like? So if a guy comes in, he's like, man, I just want to be a more present father. What is that? What is that to you?
Right.
Like, what does that even mean? And so we put habit structures together. We help men, organize their day, because for a lot of us, I'm not one that's into like vision boards. We have value boards. We don't do vision boards. I just don't want my kids coming down and just seeing a bunch of stuff on my wall. Like, this is what Dad's working for. It's useful. I think it's great and useful for a lot of people. I've been there. I just recognize that if I can say, actually, no, this is just who we are. And so if this is who we are, then these are the things that we do and these things that we don't do. And so navigating that has been really useful for us and the guys in our community. But helping them get really clear on, what they want, and then putting legs to that. And so, one of the things that we've recognized is that, a lot of our guys come from families where the dad worked really hard, kind of like known for being a hard worker, and dad wasn't really around a lot. Dude, he worked so hard, and that's how we knew he loved us. But we didn't have a lot of money. Money was always tight. And so I got into business because now I'm going to change that. And I'm going to give my kid everything that I didn't have.
Yes.
Cool. But really, you're giving your kids the same, just with more stuff. because really what probably would have been most useful for you was like a healthy, loving, present father in the home with you. And now you're like creating another trauma wound by overworking to provide something when really what you needed was presence. And so we find a balance in all of those things. Like, how do we grow infrastructure while not sacrificing our soul on the altar of that success? How do we create deep emotional intimacy with our partners, with our spouses? And so again, that looks like action. Don't intend to it. Like weekly date nights.
Yeah.
Those are a must in our community. We do Friday flowers. So every Friday you get your wife flowers. And
I love that.
it's not just for her. It's so that your kids see every week, week in and week out. Text your wife every day something that you're grateful for, and we post that in our Slack as well. And we have high accountability, weekly targets, daily gratitude, weekly wins, daily brags, monthly targets. So we're pretty high accountability on that side of things because, again, we want our guys to be active in creating the man that they're called to be. The results will follow, right?
Yes.
The fruit grows from a well-planted tree. And so, how do we plant you? And how do we help cultivate a man that you would be proud to be, that your wife is proud to be married to, that your daughters want to grow up and marry a man like you, and your sons want to grow up and be like you. So
yeah, it's helping me make this connection in your story that you shared at the beginning about how as you were navigating life, just life in general, and a lot of changes, that while God did not necessarily speak directly to you and say, look to me and change, he showed you your son sitting alone, right? Or he sent you the older man at the conference that you thought, oh, I can't let him sit alone. Like God knew how you could be reached, right? Yeah. And I just really appreciate and want to commend you on how you have brought that thread into how you serve others. That how these men can be reached, and how these men can start. Because I think sometimes we just think, well, just be a present dad, but it's like, well, what does it look like, right? Yeah. Like, what does it feel like? How can I recognize that? And so I just really commend the intentionality of, well, start doing this, and you will see the results of it.
Yeah,
brilliant things. So to follow up with that, you talked about how I work with business owners. Many of them may come to you because they see results you're producing that they want, whether it's in their home or in their business or whatever it may be. Really blunt question. Do you think that people of faith, specifically the men you work with, are better at entrepreneurship, or that it comes in as a deficit? Like, does being religious make you better at it?
No, I know a lot of people who don't believe in God who are amazing business owners. Yeah, and I know some very wealthy atheists, and very wealthy people who are of different faiths. So no, I will say that it's been said that a man without purpose is like a ship without a rudder, and so I think where the faith component actually becomes a bit of a superpower, or maybe just an extra leg to stand on, is when you can create an idea of doing something that's bigger than yourself, like feeling called to something that is inherently a spiritual thing. And so when you can tie a calling and a divine purpose into what you're doing, then it supersedes the monotony of what business becomes. And people get into business thinking it's just going to be this amazing experience, and I'm going to have time freedom and do whatever I want, and toes in the sand, cold beer in my hand. And certainly that could be the case at times. But for the most part, I've been asked why don't you do like a lifestyle vlog? I'm like, I'm at my desk all day. Like, what do you want to see? Like,
what do you want to see?
I'm reading through paperwork. I'm looking at launches that some of our companies are doing, going through P&Ls, pushing out L10 meetings. Like it
gets really, really unsexy real quick when you talk that way.
It's not like if you are a dopamine addict, entrepreneurship is going to be a real drag unless you just consistently create fires in your business to put out. Then you'll have a real blast. You'll be broke, but you'll have a blast. So yeah, I don't even know where I was going with that. That's the squirrel brain. So, but
just the ability of how important that rudder is.
Yeah,
right?
just to have something, to have a vision of something greater than yourself, even if it's just changing the trajectory of your family history, right? So for a lot of our guys, they start to recognize. We just had an in-person gathering this past Saturday. It was just beautiful. So many of our guys are like clicked, like, well, dude, I'm healing generational trauma that I didn't even know I was responsible for healing.
Oh my word.
And And so the purpose then is bigger than growing a big company. That's cool because even in the midst of that, you can change other people's history as well. And
Yes.
you can give other people opportunity that maybe they didn't see in themselves. And you have a real opportunity to speak into the lives of people and build a culture that is really beautiful and Christ-like. In the midst of that, though, you recognize that when you have something greater, it doesn't have to be something incredibly philanthropic. I think you can get there, but it could be as simple as I am going to change the way that husbands and fathers look in my family. And when you do that, you change your family. And when you change your family, you change your neighborhood. You change the kids at your kids' school who maybe don't have an active father, don't have an active parent, but they're coming to your house and they're seeing what love can look like, and they're seeing what grace can look like, and they're seeing what success can look like. Like I have a responsibility, not just to my kids, but to all their friends as well. I have a responsibility, not just to my wife, but to all my wife's friends as well. Like I'm here to set a standard. Now, I would love to say that like I was just born that way, and I've just always believed that. I mean, I've had to work to become a man who even feels like he is worthy of that love and worthy of peace. Because when you grow up in chaos and all you've known is mitigating chaos in other people's lives and creating friction in your own to put out fires, peace feels like a threat. And so recognizing
Because you're not valuable. You're not valuable in that piece.
yeah. Like my wife is about as calm as they come. I mean, she's German, so don't piss her off, but she is one of the most peace-filled human beings I've ever met in my life. Like she is the absolute proof of God's grace in my life. She's amazing. And early on in our courting or dating, is an Oklahoma term. Early in our dating, we both had kids, and when things got more serious, we courted for 3 years. Things were so good, and I would like try to agitate, I'd try to fight because that's all I knew. Yeah. She would just look at me, she's like, "Hey, Brad Pitt." I'm like, "You're not wrong." Like a wish.com, like squint your eyes in the dark, kind of there. She's like, "Are we doing Fight Club today?" And that was like, the coder, like, "Hey, you're safe. Like, we don't have to do this. We don't have to." And so we don't, we have a marriage that people are always like, "Well, you got to have healthy fights in your marriage." I'm like, "No, you don't actually. You really don't." So
yeah,
with the faith component and all of that, again, it just pulls you back to a deeper sense of purpose. And so it's not just business; it's in everything. I think faith permeates when you really understand God's grace and His love, and when you understand that your kids are sponges and they're absorbing everything that you're doing, not just what you're saying. The kids will hold you at your word for so long, but then they'll just watch the fruit. And you got two directions they're going to go, especially if you're making irresponsible or choices that just aren't useful. Is they're either going to go hard against it, and so you're going to create a really beautiful, healthy human being who doesn't want to be like you, or they're going to mirror you and they're going to repeat the same.
So, that's a vision.
And either way, there's going to be resentment towards you.
That's a vision. Wow. Well, it seems like, you start with politics that I can't imagine anything better to, close up our conversation than to ask you one more question about your marriage.
Please.
And this is something that I just am so moved by, because this is something I feel like I've been pretty good at in my own life, is within my marriage. And when you said very early on that people, they actually just want to be known, but all we fight for is to be seen. Yeah. How can you help people listening to know how to become more known? Because that's the dynamite right there. Yeah. That's the dynamite. What's a step towards that?
It's a great question.
Kind of a loaded question.
It is. It is to own the truth that you're fearfully and wonderfully made, that there was a plan for you that existed before you were ever born, that God knew you and had a design for you. And in the midst of everything that you've walked through, in the midst of the chaos that you've created, in the midst of some of the chaos that you've endured that you didn't ask for, that you still loved, that God hasn't forgotten you, even though maybe it's felt that way, that in the midst of the certain ways in which you've navigated through life and your personality is maybe too much for some, not enough for others, that the greatest gift you're going to give yourself is to recognize that who you are is worthy of love. And when you can step into that, and when you can recognize those stories that you tell yourself of, "Oh man, I'm just going to be quiet," or "They wouldn't understand me, they wouldn't know me." Recognize that story is true to you. It's confirming what you want to believe to be true. But you can tell yourself another story, and you can catch that. You can catch that in your mind, just as Jesus did in the desert when Satan tempted him with a half-truth of Scripture. "Well, certainly you're the Son of God. Certainly you're this. Certainly you're this. Certainly you're this. Why don't you just do this? Just do that. Just do this." This is why being in the Word is so important. You want to know more about yourself? Read Psalms, read Proverbs, read Scripture. And when the devil comes at you with a half truth, which is what he always does, a lot of us go to worship songs, which is okay sometimes, but recognize that Satan himself was over the music. And one of the ways that I believe that the enemy comes in and can pollute is through some of the modern worship songs that we sing that are very self-directed and self-absorbed. Scripture, though, never fails. And so when someone tells you are too much, or when that comes into your mind, or they wouldn't understand, remember there is a God who does understand. There was a God who did create you. There was a God who created you to be able to endure what you've walked through. Again, there might be some shame because you brought it on yourself. I fully understand that. There might be some things that have happened to you that you didn't ask for that have created some real trauma in your life. I fully understand that. But those stories don't have to create power over us. We allow them to because it keeps us safe perceptively. But there is no greater safety than being with people who truly know you and love you for who you are and will call you to a higher version of who you can become. I can tell you that I had a real hard time letting people know who I was. Never felt really good enough to be in the positions that I was in. I always felt like God had placed me in positions that I wasn't equipped or ready for. And it's worked out okay. But I always felt like I needed to present in a certain way. Things had to be perfect. I always had to be polished. I had to have the right answers, had to speak a certain way, had to present a certain way. And it leaves you feeling like nobody can know the real you, because if they knew the real you, if they knew the dark thoughts that you had, if they knew the propensities that you have at moments, if they knew that sometimes you didn't have it all figured out, they knew that some days you just sat and cried for a few minutes because you just didn't have it all figured out. And the pain that you've experienced and the frustration and the loss and the hurt and the anxiety that you feel like nobody would understand, there are more that would understand than you recognize. But you have to be willing to open that container, to let yourself be fully known and to not settle for being seen. And that's scary. But I can tell you, as somebody who is married to a woman who holds the pain that I've experienced in a very, very Christ-like way, more than I've ever known in my life outside of my grandmother. It'd be the greatest gift that you give yourself, because it's only when you recognize that you're worthy of love and peace, because you are, and you can create new stories, new habits, and new relationships to edify that position. It's only then that you can really fully love other people, because right now you can only love people to the extent of your ability and your propensity to want to be known, or really not even want to, because we all desire it, but your willingness to be open to be known. But when you can give yourself that gift, well, then you're able to give the gift of who you are to the world fully. Richard Rohr says it this way in Falling Upward. He says the true spiritual contentment is when there's nothing to prove, hide, or protect. The soul recognizes that it's enough, it's always been enough, and it will always be enough.
I'm speechless, which is really rare. We have been absolutely filled today. And I don't want to step on the toes of those final thoughts on what is possible for anybody listening right now. What is there? And that as you go on that journey through, observing Cody or coming to know who you are, just remember, my favorite thing that you said is to remember that God is kind. There is a God that is kind, that is going to be part of that journey.
So be kind.
Kind to yourself.
Yeah.
Kind to yourself. I am so filled. I am just absolutely filled. Thank you so much for sharing this space with us and for sharing your journey. And I'm just so glad I get to do life with you.
Yeah,
it's impressive.
Likewise.
Thank you so much, Cody, for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Unreasonable Autonomy podcast. If you loved this episode, my guests and I would love to hear about it. Go to the show notes to reach out and let me know what resonated with you or what topics or guests you want to hear in the future. I am here to create for you. Look, I deeply admire your commitment to pushing boundaries and going after an unreasonable life. Keep dreaming big, taking bold steps, and expecting the unreasonable. For more, go to the show notes to dive deeper into the conversations that will keep you going. Thanks for being here.